My guest this hour is Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. She has been a teacher for nearly 30 years, but stepped away from the public school setting to teach in a maximum security prison for 3 years. The book, 7 Doors In, is about her experience teaching inmates. Here's the first segment of our interview. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about your book, 7 Doors In, and I know that we will reach into a lot of things because this is a broad subject. But to start at the beginning, I'd like to know what made you write the book.
When I started teaching 29 years ago, I taught in a public school. And honestly, I didn't really realize that there are other places to teach other than in schools. But 2 years before I left Michigan in 2012, my supervisor came to me and said, "Hey, Beth, the adult education program needs somebody to help with mathematics. Would you be willing to do that for a couple hours every night in the evenings?" And I said, I'll give it a shot. Maybe I can make a difference. Well, that was such an incredible experience because I learned quickly that adults go to school because they know what it's like not to have an education, whereas kids go to school because they're required to. So long story short, when I moved to Iowa in 2014, I thought, I'm going to step away from public schools for a little bit and see if I can help some more adults. So a position came open at the maximum security prison. And I applied for it and I got it. And I was very, very excited to work there because I had such a great experience teaching adult ed back home. I walked into that prison with no judgment, no expectations. I come from a very small town called Ironwood in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And, I come from an area where we didn't lock our doors. The best news you would ever hear is who is getting married or what was the biggest buck somebody shot. That was our small town. So I never experienced gang life. I never experienced prison. I didn't know anybody in prison. So when I walked into that prison, it was a totally different experience for me. And I was gifted a new appreciation for life. And when I left the prison, I couldn't let it go. All the things that I saw happen in my classroom, when you truly believe in somebody, to see how that person can just excel, I wanted to share that with the world. So that's why I decided to write the book. And I'm not one to write a book. I'm a math teacher. I like to do math problems, not sit and read books. So for me to write a book, this was so impactful on my life, and that's why I did it.
You were there for 3 years, you say?
Yes.
So tell us about the experience, what it was like, what you saw, and let's start there, and then we'll get into how the students perceived you and other things like that. So
my first day, as I walked in, all I thought about is, these are my new students. What am I going to say to them? How am I going to get them motivated? How am I going to get them to reach their potentials? Just like I would do in any other classroom. I wasn't walking in thinking, I'm going to be standing in front of murderers and rapists. I didn't look at it like that. I looked at it as they are my students and I'm their teacher and I'm going to help them succeed. So when I walked in the first day, when I walked into the classroom, it was a different classroom than I had ever seen before. There were a few desks. It was an old prison. Actually, after the first year, we moved into a new prison. But it was an old prison with chipped paint, and there's a couple posters on the walls, motivational posters. There are a few books. There are packets that the men worked on, sitting on the counters and that, and some old desks and old tables. But and some old computers. And there was a little book there that was a book of all the men's poetry they had written throughout the years. So as I was sitting there waiting for the men to come to class, I could see them walking down the sidewalk. I was thinking to myself, how am I going to put a positive spin on this? Because this is where they're used to coming. This is their home. This is where they go to school. I didn't want to look at it and say, oh, you guys don't have many books. You don't have much on the walls. We need to change that. When they came in, I read the posters on the walls with excitement. I said, that's so awesome, these motivational posters. I love that you have them here. And I picked up a book, and it was a Spanish-English book. And I said, I'd really like to learn Spanish. That's really cool that you have that book. And then throughout the hour, I went over to the book of poems. And I said, I've read the first poem already. Do any of you have poems in this book? I'm really excited to read the whole book. So I wanted to have a positive outlook. I didn't want to go in there and be negative, because I know how negative it has to be living in that environment. My first experience, when I started teaching at the prison, the men were given packets, and they'd sit around tables and they'd work on the packets. And they also had some old computers where they could listen to music while they worked. Well, one of the men raised his hand and asked for help. At that time, there were 2 teachers there. After a few months, I was the only teacher in there the whole time I was there. But anyways, he raised his hand and asked for help. And I said, I'll help you. So I went over to him and I sat down next to him. He was doing a math problem. And I went through that problem with him. He was wearing headphones. He took one of the headphones away to listen to me. And then we went through the problem. And I said, no, I want you to do a problem. I'm going to ask you some questions and walk you through it to make sure you understand it. He removed that other headphone, and he was really listening to me. And when we got done, he looked at me and he said, you're not scared. He goes, why aren't you scared? And I looked at him and I said, should I be scared? Why would I be scared? I'm just here to help you guys. That's it. I'm a teacher. You're my students. I'm here to help you. I don't care what you did in the past. Your past is your past. When you walk through door 7, you want to make a change in your life. And I'm excited to be part of that change. And everybody in here, if you guys work 100%, I'm going to work 110% to make sure you guys succeed at what you want to do. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a big moment for me, because all the men in the room were listening. And I think that they truly felt that I sincerely cared. So that was my first experience walking in.
And briefly on the students, how did you get your students? How were they picked? Was it mandatory for some? Obviously there's a lot of prisoners there. So how did they get down to the number of students that you had in your class?
So when I started, there was about 12 students that came to school. When I left, there was about 48. So the 12 students, if you, at the time, I don't know what the rule is now, but at the time when I was there, if you were under 21 and did not have a diploma, you had to go to school. If you already had a diploma, you couldn't go to school unless you tested with the need to have help with reading. Everybody else that came to school did not have a diploma and came by choice. So only those under 21 were required to go to school if they didn't have a diploma. And they got paid 30 cents an hour to go to school.
What about the class structure? Like, how often did you teach? Were they teaching? Were you there every day or just certain days of the week? How was the class? And what was the curriculum like? Were you just teaching the math or other things as well?
I was there full time, and I taught writing, math, and social studies. And I'm a math teacher for 29 years. I've been teaching math. So to go in there and teach a writing class and a social studies class, that wasn't easy for me. I remember one of the guys telling me, he looked at me and said, Miss Beth, when you teach math, you just light up. He goes, but you're not like that when you teach writing. That was so motivational to me that I had to fix that. And I did. I went and I worked so hard in the evenings on coming up with really good lessons for them so they could get more excited about writing also. The men, if they were in Unit 1, they could only come to school 1 hour, and that was the first hour of the day. Other than that, I assigned them to classes, and I had 4 other classes throughout the day. So I could have them come to 1 class, 2 classes. It just depended on where they were at, how far they were with their curriculum. Somebody that was just starting out, I didn't want to overwhelm them. I wanted to take it slow. And that's what I did. I also had math labs, writing labs, and social study lab. So the men that were in a class, they had the option of coming to school another hour and working in another classroom with one of the offender tutors to get extra help in that subject area. So I had that extra help. I had 3 classrooms, and I'd put the offender tutors in the other classrooms working on helping the men with reading or, again, with the subject matter. So, yes. And if for some reason the prison was locked down, sometimes I'd be sent to the kitchen to work, to help bake lunches, whatever they needed. That's what you did. Or I would go over to the cell houses and I'd work with them through their doors. I wanted them to learn, and I didn't want them to use, we're locked down for a week as an excuse not to do school. So they knew, once they got used to me, they knew once I was there, if there was going to be a lockdown and there was no school, they knew I was coming to see them, to keep them motivated and to keep them on track. So even if they're locked down, I was at work.
Wow. She is obviously passionate about teaching and was really focus on giving them the most she could give them. Coming up, I continue my conversation with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
We return to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer. Once again, here's Charles Love.
Are you tired of summer nights in Maine?
Welcome back. We're playing my interview with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. In the last segment, she talked about teaching during lockdown, and she said it so matter-of-factly that I couldn't just move on. So I asked her to talk about what caused the lockdowns. That's interesting. You got to remember, you're talking to people who don't know much about the prison system. So talk about these lockdowns. How did they get locked down for a whole week?
Well, if there was a fight or something, if something happened, then they would lock them down. Or like I said, it could be a week. I mean, they had what they called like a mini riot. It was like 80 guys. It only lasts like a minute or so. For that, they locked down for I think 2 months. But that was right before our move to the new prison. So we were doing inventories. They're getting the men ready to move to the new prison. But also if the sharpshooters can't see, if it's too foggy out, they're not going to let the men out of their pods. I mean, So sometimes they might have been locked down so that they could only be out in their pods.
Right.
But the environment had to be right for them to come out. It just depended on the situation.
Yeah.
Some guys actually, they like that quiet time to themselves. I mean, I talked to some men that were in Unit 1. You make your way up. So if you're in Unit 1, that's where you start at. If your behavior is good, that you move to Unit 2 and so on. There are some, like especially the older people, that like to stay in Unit 1 because it was so structured. Mm-hmm. They knew exactly where they get out. They had their own cells in Unit 1. That was important to some of them. Mm-hmm. So for different reasons, some people didn't want to move to different tiers, while as others liked the extra freedom. So they worked really hard to be able to move up the tier system.
So those who wanted to stay in Unit 1, did they have to intentionally, change their behavior to stay there?
I don't know how that works, but I know I had one guy in school and he was really, really quiet, an elderly man. And he was always in tier 1 and he told me that's where he wanted to stay. So I don't know if they gave him that opportunity to stay. I don't know how that works.
If they had to.
I don't see him. I couldn't see him doing anything. He was so quiet and timid and shy, but that doesn't mean anything either.
Right. You just wouldn't want them to be in a situation where they're feeling that they're forced to act badly just so they can stay in their single cells or stay in a unit that they want to stay in. That's interesting. Back to your book, though, obviously the title, 7 Doors In. Let's talk about what these 7 doors are. Are there actually 7 doors?
There's 7 doors I walked in to get. When I opened the 7th door, I was in my classroom.
Okay.
So I walked the reader from the parking lot my first day in through all 7 of those doors and into my classroom, where you truly see what happens when you believe in someone. So these doors, are these just various layers of security and checkpoints, things that you had to go through? I had to go through, yep. Yes.
Wow.
And my life support was my radio. So as I entered into the first doorway, I was given a radio that I kept on me at all times. That was on at all time. So if I needed help, I could just push the button or I could call for help. But that was my lifeline. So you're in this class all day with all these inmates of various reasons they're there. And you say that you were obviously treating them fairly and not judging them by what they had done. But the one guy did ask you, why aren't you afraid? So did you ever have any situations in those? I mean, I would assume in 3 years something happened, but a situation where you felt threatening or where something happened in your classroom? I don't. They call the school the safe zone. There's one place there wasn't any fights. Mm-hmm. Yes, when I go to lockup, the men would holler different things and make comments and that. But other than that, I really didn't experience anything. That doesn't mean there wasn't anything there that security might have been dealing with that I just was. Anyways, I did not feel threatened at any time. I did not feel scared at any time. And maybe I was just a little too naive. I don't know. But all that was going through my head when I was there is that I'm the teacher, they're my students, and I'm going to help them get to where they want to go. And that was my drive.
Right. But you're talking about your feelings, which everybody's different. They were reactive. And I was just asking specifically if there were any instances, right? So if there was something that happened, it would be a matter of how you felt.
No,
this is what happened.
I'll tell you one story. The men, when I went and started teaching as a traditional school, I had a Math 1 class. And before classes started, I did an orientation. And I'll tell you, the one thing I did do was I purposely had people sit together that may not have gotten along very well out on the yard. I did that on purpose because I teach about teamwork and the importance of getting along. I actually remember my officer saying, "Are you crazy putting these guys together?" I said, "No, we're going to learn something here." I made it crystal clear to the men in orientation that I'm going to make a chart and they were going to sit where I put them. And if that seat wasn't good enough, then I was very stern about it. But also very stern about the little issue. The first day of math class, I gave an assignment. And I told them that I expect the assignment to be done tomorrow. Done when you come back to class.
Yeah, you're really breaking up.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, anyways, I told the men that if you're going to go to school, you're going to do your homework. So first day, the guys came back with homework done. 3 of the guys didn't have the work done. And I told them, "You're going back to yourself." And they're cussing me, they're mad, they didn't want to go back. So that was a little bit of, I guess, where I had to step back a little bit, because they were angry. But they left, and I told them, I said, "I'll expect you to come back tomorrow with your homework done if you want to come to class. Everybody else has their work done. I expect you to have your work done too, because you're not going to hold up the other students." So they came back the next day. 2 of the men had the work done. 1 of them didn't. So I stood out in the hall with them, and I said, "Listen, maybe right now is not the time for you to be in school, and that's all right. But if you're going to come to school, you have to do the work. And if you need to think about this for a couple months and then come back, that's fine too." The next day he came back with his homework done, and I never had an issue with guys not having their homework done again. So that was a little stressful, but I think the guys respected me for being consistent.
What would you say your biggest challenge was? I would think that most people would assume it was a prisoner thing or, violence or something like that. My guess would be, tell me if I'm wrong, that it would be the fact that unlike, your traditional classroom in K through 12, there's varying levels of experience there too. But here is probably really wide where you got people who are at so many different levels that you're trying to manage all that to get them up to the level you want them at. Is that correct? Or was there something else that was your biggest
challenge? Say that more, I was lucky, like I said, because I had the offender tutors where I could break some of that up a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest challenge was the under 21s. Because again, they had to go to school. It wasn't an option.
Right.
So some of them didn't feel that they should have to go to school. So some days were tough with them because they'd give me a little bit more of an attitude. Mm-hmm. But other than that, after we had our talks about, it's not an option. You have to be here or otherwise you're going to go back to Unit 1. They started to understand a little more. And as they matured and as they started passing tests, that problem took care of itself.
Mm-hmm. And what did you learn about prison life by being there?
The toughest part for me was going in every day, seeing that now many of these men had jobs and they were learning, they're getting educated. They're being accountable for things. And I look at all their learning in prison thinking, why bother? They're never getting out. So if we're going to reform people, I think it's important that we give people that second chance. And I'm not saying everybody can live in the free world, but I will say this. My 15-year-old daughter told me this. She looked at me one day because I was saying, I don't believe everybody can live in the free world. Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she said, prison is supposed to be a place for reform. If they can't be reformed in prison, then they need to go somewhere else. And I thought that was a very strong point that she made.
What could somewhere else be?
Maybe mental health, somewhere where they can get the help that they actually need. So do I feel everybody should...
Isn't that just another prison? If you're forced to be institutionalized, you're forcing them into... it's funny. It's like I'm challenging, just questioning a viewpoint that you said is interesting, but it's not even necessarily yours. So it's like
right, exactly. And I guess the way talking with my daughter about it and thinking about it, I look at that as more a place where, almost like a hospital, where they get the help that they need. And it's a different environment, I feel.
Right.
I mean, in prison, you're constantly watching your back. I would think in mental health, there'd be somebody there working with you specifically to try to help you get through whatever your issues are. And I don't think you have that much help in prison. There's counselors, there's psychiatrists, but you know, when you got a couple of psychiatrists or 700 some people in prison, that's not a lot of help. And they worked hard. I really liked the psychiatrists and the counselors at the prison. I thought they really were helpful to the men.
You know, I'm always interested in conversations about the big issues and their solutions. I don't have all the answers, but it's important to talk about these things. And it's great when we can have conversations with people with different perspectives and different experiences. More with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are continuing my conversation with Beth Deacon, teacher and author of 7 Doors In. At the end of the last segment, we were discussing the problems that education, prison reform, all these things, community, lifestyle, family, that tie into the problems in the criminal justice system and how we can fix them. And Beth was talking about how her daughter had an interesting idea that on the surface sounds good, but I thought that there could be some problems with it. And so we ended up talking a little bit more about that. Here we continue that conversation. It's a tough situation, so it's not like you can just instantly snap your finger and fix it. I'm thinking that we're just trading one problem for another, possibly, because we're assuming that, you know, everybody who's in there and can't be reformed have a mental problem, which may not be the case. But, you know, whatever the case may be, what I like about it is you're saying, do something different. Think outside the box. Because, you know, as we were talking earlier, it just baffles me that I still don't understand how the government can manage a system that allows people to basically continue to foster that type of behavior that got them in prison, basically taking them off the street because we think they're too violent to do it there, and just letting them do it amongst themselves in the prison. Why can't they do what they have to do to protect all the prisoners who are there?
Yes. And I think that, I'm going to tell you a little story. I had a man come up to me. He was 18 years old, and he came to class a couple minutes early, and he said, "Miss Beth, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure, what is it?" And he said, and at the time I was 47 years old. He said, "How old are you?" And I said, "Well, how old do you think I am?" And he said, 36 or 37. And I said, "Add 10 years to that." And his eyes got so big. I can picture it like it was yesterday. He looked at me and he said, "Miss Beth, you're old. I don't know anybody that's lived that long. None of my family members have ever been that old." I could feel the tears coming down my face. I walked to the back of the room because that's when I truly, truly realized that I was raised in a totally different environment than so many others. I was raised with parents that strongly encouraged education. We had family celebrations. We had home-cooked meals. I wasn't dodging bullets and looking for food. And then I look at some of these men that I worked with and the environments they had to grow up in. What chance did they have? Education was the furthest thing from their minds, and I get it. I think if we're going to fix the problems in prison, we need to fix the reasons why people are going to prison and its environment. I don't have the answer, but if we don't get to the root of this, it's just going to continue to escalate.
Right. It's just so hard to do, like you say, because how do we get into every household that has a bad environment there? But there's things we can do to make it better. We have to start from the premise that some things can't be solved. You're talking about human nature. We can't make every human perfect. However, we can put them in better positions. And I don't think the things that we do politically, the things that we do religiously, the things that we do as a secular society are necessarily moving in that direction. People just pick one piece of it and say, there's a problem. Let's try this. Let's throw money at it. Let's elect people who do this. Let's get rid of police. It all will help something, but there's an offset to it because It is not that any of them are necessarily wrong. That's the argument. We make everything a political argument, like the left and the right are wrong about this. They're both right and wrong about some things. The issue is that they're starting in the middle of the problem and not at the root of the problem.
Exactly.
If the root of the problem is, if we know that the more educated a person is, regardless of how poor they were, regardless of their race and where they live, the better education they are, the better opportunity, and the less likely they end up in prison. If we know that, and that's a guaranteed fact, we all understand that. If we know that, and we know if somebody grows up in a violent household with abuse or alcoholism or drug use and all that stuff, that incredibly increases their chances of failure. So if we know those two things, why don't we do as much as we can to mitigate those two things and see what happens? What we do is say, how can we get Johnny, who's 22, to stop shooting people?
Exactly.
You're
exactly right.
Johnny may already be lost. But what are we doing to the 5, 6, 7-year-old? We have to find a way, more mentorships. Go to those parents who are not involved in their lives anyway and say, do you mind if we take your kid and teach them stuff? You don't want them around anyway. You want to go to the club. Most of those parents would be like, fine, I got a free babysitter. And then we change what that kid sees.
You know what else I would like to do, and I don't know if it'll work or not, but if the pandemic didn't hit when it did, I would like to have tried it last summer. I would like to try. I teach algebra, which is 9th grade class, and so the 8th graders have an orientation before they come up to the high school. I would like to have an orientation for the parents and say, listen, I would like you to see what happens in math class. I'd like you to come into the room and let me teach you a little bit. And I know that's difficult to get people to come into the classroom, but this is the way I look at it. Maybe the first week I get 2 parents to come in and I make them feel comfortable enough and have such a good time that maybe next week they'll bring 2 more parents in. I believe if we can get parents to come into the school, because a lot of parents won't even come into the school, I think that's another baby step at helping them be more supportive of education. So I think that's a big struggle, because a lot of the kids tell me in my classes that their parents were not great school students. They didn't like school. So if they didn't like school, what are they telling? Obviously, they're telling their kids they didn't like school. So we need to get them into the school system in a comfortable manner so they want to come back.
More with Beth Deacon, author of 7 Doors In. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of the Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. We are having a great conversation with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. The book is about her 3 years teaching in a maximum security prison, but we have gone into what happened there, how to keep people from going to prison, education, and now parental involvement, which is really important. We just don't know how we can force them to do it. But she continues here talking about that. We get into what she learned being in a prison. Did it make her a better teacher? And why she left the prison. You're 100% right. I would start a little higher. I think we get to the parents, and you made the key point at the end, and go to those parents who either weren't good students or who simply aren't really focusing on education, like telling their kids how important it is, and tell them how, look, I'm not asking you to get it or know it because you're 35 or you're 40, you've already passed the point. All we're asking you to do as the parent is to tell them how important education is. If you just get to that little piece, if you're just pushing your kids to say, I'm telling you, as difficult as it may be, as much as you may not like it, this will make your life better. If that's good, because the teacher's already doing it. If you also had the parent doing that, that doesn't take any extra time. It doesn't cost you any money. I'm not telling you to give up one of your 3 jobs. I'm just saying, make education important. When they say they want to play that video game and watch that TV show, say, sure, after spending 15 minutes on algebra.
Yes.
If you just talk about the importance of education in your house, that changes everything right there.
I agree with you. But I also agree with the fact that bringing the parents into the school, building that rapport with them, making them feel comfortable with the teacher-parent, that might help also. I think we need to look at all options, all possibilities, but something needs to be done because there's too many kids. Like, my hardest struggle in high school is knowing that I have students that are happy to get a D- in a class. How can you be happy to get a D-?
Right.
Put some effort in, show that you care about something. How do you change that mentality? You change it, like you said, with the parents, but the parents have got to be involved.
Were there any surprises that you saw in the prison? Something that you learned that surprised you positively? Because we hear so much negative, or negatively. Like, wow, I didn't know that. Some people might be like, you talked about counselors today. I didn't know they actually did that. I thought they just threw them in a room and left them there. Like anything that you want to tell people because you got your eyes inside.
Yes, one thing that really surprised me is the men got paid 30 cents to go to school per hour. And that was really important to them. The first day of class, when they left, they would say to me, make sure you write down my hours. I need to get my 30 cents. Mm-hmm. So that really surprised me. Mm-hmm. It surprised me also that they brought in different programs. Like there was a yoga instructor there once working with some of the men, and somebody doing meditation, which I think is really cool. And I didn't realize that priests and pastors came into prisons, and many of the men were involved with church. Mm-hmm. They had arts and crafts, which I thought was cool. And I'll tell you, the work I saw some of these men do, it was unbelievable.
I can believe
very, very, very artistic. Just every little detail.
Right. Think about it. Some of them probably already had that talent. Now you get somebody to show them some stuff, and then they have idle time. Yeah. I can just imagine how great some of that stuff was.
It was incredible. I was also surprised, like with me, all I carried was a radio. And I did have an officer that worked with me, but he actually helped out too. After a while, he started helping out with the reading with the guys. There was one time when a man was in there and he couldn't be around a woman. So the officer had to be in the room. Since he was in the room, I said, well, since you're here, you can help teach the men how to read. So he would actually sit and read with some of the men, which I thought was cool. Very much some support from the officers is really cool.
Now, you were a teacher for 29 years. You were teaching 15 to 18 years before you even did this, and you've been teaching after that. High school, you got a nice sense of what teaching is like. Did teaching those 3 years in the prison make you a better teacher? And if so, how?
I think it made me a better teacher, that I have more of an appreciation for life, and I share that a lot more with my students. We talk about the little things, and I had such appreciation for life. Like just even watching my dog when I take him for walks and he'd chase the leaves and that. Now I sit back and just let him do that and laugh. And I talk about the little things in class with my students and how appreciative I am that, I can come to work every day and I have a job. I show that appreciation and gratitude. And I don't believe I really did that before. Mm-hmm. Also, working with the men in the prison, there were many different issues that they had. I think that I learned more about their backgrounds, and that helped with the students I currently have. Mm-hmm. When I was back in Michigan, I taught in a school where I'd say about 90% of the kids were going to college. Mm-hmm. Now I teach in a school where it's a very depressed area. And I think that this experience working at the prison helped me to understand more of where people are coming from. Because the men would tell me stories about their upbringing and that. And many, many, many of them, like I said, just were happy to have a mayonnaise sandwich to eat. And, I always said I came from a poor family. My parents didn't have much. My dad was a miner. But in reality, I had a lot. I had so much support. I had safety. I had my parents pushing me to get a good education. But I learned in that environment that that's not always the case. And I brought that with me to my new job.
And why did you leave the teaching?
I had no plans of staying in the prison atmosphere forever. I eventually wanted, my love is working with kids. I wanted to go back and work with kids.
Coming up, our final segment with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We have reached our final segment with Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach and author of 7 Doors In. Here I ask her what she wanted people to take away from the book. And I keep mentioning that she's a teen coach, so she talks a little bit about what she tries to do to help teens. And it's interesting, she has already come up with the follow-up to 7 Doors In, 7 Doors Out. And that's part of her coaching plan. And finally, we talk about the wonderful news of her book being optioned for a film. Here's the final segment. What do you think the reader will learn most by the book?
They're going to learn that when you truly, truly believe in someone, anything is possible. And they're going to see how hard these men worked and how incredible the ripple effect is. And I don't want to say all that because I want to give the reader something, right. But there are some really, really powerful stories in there that I think that if you're an empathetic person, you'll enjoy. The people that I had read it to endorse it, some of the comments I got was that, there was a time to laugh in the book and there was some time for crying, that it was a very emotional book. I just think if you care about people, you'll really enjoy the book. Now, is it all this gory stuff about fights in the prison? No, that is not the point of the book. The point of the book to me is that these men worked really hard and they came together and they were able to reach their goal. And all the little things that happened in that time, and why I feel second chances are very, very important for not everybody, but for most.
That's key. And tell us about 7 Doors Out.
I am in the process of starting my own coaching business to work with teens. I have a daughter that struggles with epilepsy. And when we moved to Iowa, she was at the high school and I was teaching at the prison. And she really didn't have any friends. She was bullied. She had a really tough time. And I know as a parent how I felt. I don't ever want a kid to feel that way. So I want to teach kids, I want to coach kids to thrive in high school and to know that they're valued and it's okay to be unique and to help them get a vision of what they want to do after high school. So that's what my coaching business is about, but that's also what my book is about. Mm-hmm. For example, should you date or shouldn't you date? I talk about that because that is a big issue for high schoolers. Mm-hmm. The way they dress, their hair, I talk about all of that in there. And, going to prom, when should they start worried about scholarships for college? Should they go to college? Mm-hmm. Maybe college isn't for everybody because I don't believe it is. Right. But I start out with their first day of school and as a freshman in high school. And I take them through their years until they're out. So it's 7 doors out because eventually they leave high school and they go on with their lives. Right. It's a short book. It's just a 50-page book. It's an ebook.
Okay. And so 7 Doors In is available, will be out on June 8th on paperback, but you can pre-order on Amazon, so go on Amazon and buy it. But I guess we want to end this by letting people know that there's a film option for the book.
Yes. I'm really excited about that. I optioned my book for film with independent filmmaker Terrence Gordon. And he has already started his research. He started to write the script. So the movie will be based off of the book. And he's got some really, really interesting ideas for it. I'm very excited. It's going to be very powerful.
That's great. I encourage people to pick up the book. And then when the movie comes out, look for it and then check that out. She is Beth Deacon, teacher, teen coach, and author of 7 Doors In. Beth, it's been great. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's awesome. Appreciate it.